Today, we are digging into something that, well, a lot of you have probably dealt with. We're asking, why do some injuries just seem to stick around forever? You know, the one, that nagging pain that no matter what you do, just refuses to go away.
You've probably done all the right things, right? You've rested, you've iced it, you've gone to physical therapy, and yet that pain in your shoulder or your Achilles, it just lingers. It feels like it should be a simple local problem. But what if it's not? What if the real story is something much bigger, like a conspiracy unfolding across your entire body?
So here's the game plan. We'll start with how we usually think about these injuries. Then we'll get to the plot twist, where some of the body's biggest systems get involved. We're going to connect the dots between our nerves, our immune system, and even our metabolism. And by the end, you'll see why healing is truly a whole body job. Okay, let's begin where pretty much every diagnosis does, right at the spot that hurts. The conventional wisdom for these kinds of chronic tendon issues has always been pretty straightforward. The fancy clinical term is tendinopathy. And it's more than just a bit of inflammation. It's literally a state of failed healing. Think about it like this. Your body's repair crew shows up to fix a torn tendon, but they're completely disorganized. They're using the wrong tools, the wrong materials, and they end up just making a bigger mess. So, for a long time, we've seen tendinopathy as just a mechanical breakdown. You overload a tendon through overuse, and its beautiful, neat structure starts to fall apart. Those strong, parallel collagen fibers, which are like the ropes holding you together, they become a chaotic, tangled knot. For decades, the story ended there, a purely local, structural problem. But that's really just the opening scene. And this is where the story gets really interesting. It turns out that focusing only on that injured tissue is like a detective showing up to a crime scene and only looking at the chalk outline on the floor. The real clues are scattered everywhere else. So here's the twist. The tendon? That's just the crime scene. The real culprits, the masterminds behind why this thing won't heal, are some of the most powerful systems in your entire body. And it seems like they're all working together to keep it from getting better. We are talking about a full-blown conspiracy between three major players: your nervous system, your immune system, and your metabolic or endocrine system. Each one is secretly adding to the chaos, turning what should have been a simple injury into a chronic nightmare. So let's start by bringing in our first two suspects for questioning. Your nervous system and your immune system are always talking to each other. It's a constant chatter. But in a chronic injury, that conversation turns toxic. It becomes a vicious feedback loop of pain and inflammation that just feeds on itself. A key piece of the puzzle here is something called neoinnervation. This is just a wild process where brand new, extra sensitive nerve fibers actually start to sprout and grow into the damaged tendon. Now, this is a place that's supposed to have very few nerve endings. It's like your body decides to install a ridiculously sensitive, faulty fire alarm right in the middle of a smoldering building. And this new wiring doesn't just report the problem, it actively makes it worse. See, these new nerve endings aren't quiet. They are constantly pumping out chemical messengers like substance P and CGRP. And these little molecules are troublemakers. They don't just send pain signals up to your brain, they also hang around the injury site and ramp up inflammation and sensitivity. They're basically pouring gasoline on the very fire they're supposed to be warning you about. This picture really shows us what's happening on the ground. First, the stressed out tendon cells start screaming for help. They release these danger signals. Think of it as a cellular 911 call. That call wakes up nearby immune cells, which rush in and start releasing inflammatory chemicals. And at the exact same time, it makes all the local pain nerves hair trigger sensitive. But the chaos doesn't stop there. That emergency signal travels up the nerve to your spinal cord. And there, it can wake up other cells, called glial cells, which act like amplifiers. They crank up the volume on that pain signal before it even gets to your brain. This is a huge deal. It's called central sensitization. Your entire nervous system goes on high alert. The volume knob on your pain gets turned to max, and suddenly, even things that shouldn't hurt, like a light touch, become incredibly painful. Okay, so we've got a faulty alarm system creating a vicious cycle of pain and inflammation. That explains why the pain persists. But what makes the tendon so weak and vulnerable in the first place? Well, for that, we need to bring our third conspirator into the interrogation room, your metabolic system. I want you to look at this number. Just a single number, but it tells a huge story about your risk for tendon injury. That number is 3. 3 times. It turns out that people with elevated blood sugar, even if they're not officially diabetic, have a 3 times higher risk of tendon injury. That is a direct and, frankly, startling link between what's happening in your blood and the health of your connective tissues. So, how does that work?
One of the main mechanisms involves something called advanced glycation end products, or AGEs for short. This is what happens when extra sugar floating around in your blood basically gets sticky and gloms onto proteins, like the collagen in your tendons. The best analogy I've heard is to imagine pouring sticky, liquid caramel all over a bundle of strong, flexible ropes. What happens? They get stiff, they get brittle, and they get weak. That's exactly what AGEs do to your tendons. And it's not just about sugar. Other players in what we call metabolic syndrome get in on the action too. High cholesterol, for example, can directly get in the way of healing. Obesity creates a state of constant, low-grade inflammation all over your body, which is just a terrible environment for any kind of tissue repair. And at the root of it all, you often find insulin resistance, which is kind of the engine driving this whole mess. All right, we've identified our 3 culprits: the nervous system, the immune system, and the metabolic system. Now let's put it all together and see how they work in concert to create the perfect storm, that chronic, unhealed injury.
And this quote from the research really hits the nail on the head. This is a systemic issue. That means the damage isn't just happening in the tendons you use all the time, like your Achilles. Your body's internal environment can be weakening tendons everywhere, making you vulnerable to injury from just normal everyday activities. So let's walk through the cycle. First, you have a weak foundation. Metabolic issues like those AGEs we talked about are making your tendons brittle. Second, a small injury happens, but it triggers a massive, prolonged overreaction from your immune and nervous systems. Third, that faulty alarm system gets installed. Those new hypersensitive nerves grow into the area, cranking up the pain. Fourth, those nerves and the immune cells get locked into a feedback loop, constantly feeling each other, and the end result? Healing fails. The tendon gets stuck in this awful state of chronic degeneration and sensitivity. So, what is the big takeaway from all of this? It's that to truly fix a chronic tendon injury, we might have to stop staring at the tendon itself. The evidence is pointing us in a new direction. We need to zoom out and start looking at our whole body health, managing our metabolic state, calming down our nervous system, and lowering that systemic inflammation. And that leaves us with a really powerful final thought. For so long, we've treated these injuries as if they were just simple mechanical problems in one specific spot. But if chronic pain is actually a systemic problem, a deep-seated conspiracy between our body's most powerful systems, then doesn't it stand to reason that the treatment should be systemic too? It's a question that might just change everything about how we understand and treat pain.